I stepped out onto the porch of my home in Stone Creek, the morning sun filtering through the oak trees that lined our quiet suburban street. At 52, I'd learned to savor these moments of peace before the demands of the day pulled me back into the fray. My burgundy silk robe draped comfortably over my shoulders, and in one hand, I held a steaming mug of Earl Grey tea, its bergamot scent cutting through the crisp air. In the other, a stack of legal journals, my constant companions, reminders of the battles I'd fought and won in federal courtrooms across the Eastern District. Being a black woman in my position wasn't just a job, it was a testament to resilience. I'd spent decades climbing from public defender to federal judge, navigating systems rigged against people who looked like me. Mornings like this grounded me, a brief respite where I could reflect on the cases that kept me up at night, discrimination suits, civil rights violations that echoed my own experiences growing up in a world quick to judge based on skin color. I was about to head back inside when the screech of tires shattered the calm. A police cruiser pulled up abruptly at the end of my driveway, its lights flashing once before going dark. A young officer, probably in his late 20s, stepped out, Clint Higgins, as I'd later learn from his badge. His eyes narrowed as he scanned me, his posture stiff with unwarranted suspicion. "Ma'am." "Hold it right there," he barked, his voice carrying across the lawn like a command from someone who assumed authority without question. I turned slowly, keeping my movements deliberate. Years of dealing with bias had taught me the importance of composure. "Good morning, officer," I said evenly, setting my mug down on the porch railing. "Can I help you? You live here?" His tone was clipped, accusatory, as if my presence in my own yard was inherently suspect. "Yes," I replied, gesturing lightly to the house behind me. "I'm just retrieving my mail." The mailbox was right there, but he didn't seem to care about facts. He strode closer, hand resting on his belt near his holster. "We're investigating a car theft in the area. I need to see some ID." I felt that familiar chill, the one that came not from fear, but from exhaustion. How many times had I been here, reduced to a stereotype? "Officer, I'm on my own property. Unless you have probable cause, I'm not obligated to provide identification." His face hardened. "Don't play lawyer with me. I can arrest you for obstructing an investigation." The words hung in the air, and in that moment, the quiet neighborhood felt oppressively silent. Neighbors peeked through curtains, but no one intervened. The storm had arrived uninvited, and I knew this was just the beginning. His words hit me like a slap, but I held my ground, my voice steady despite the rising pulse in my throat. "Officer," as I said, "I'm on my own property. Without probable cause, you can't demand my ID." I knew the law inside out, after all, I'd enforced it from the bench for years. But knowledge wasn't armor against the kind of prejudice staring me down. Higgins's face twisted into a sneer, his blue eyes narrowing under the brim of his cap. "You live here? In this neighborhood?" He glanced at my house, the colonial-style home I'd bought after my appointment to the federal bench, as if it offended him. "We're dealing with a stolen vehicle report. Show me some proof, or things get complicated." I took a measured breath, the tea I'd set down now forgotten, cooling on the railing. "I'm retrieving my mail, officer." "That's not a crime." My mind raced through precedents, Terry versus Ohio, the Fourth Amendment protections I'd cited in rulings. But here, in my own yard, it felt personal, an echo of every stop and frisk I'd seen disproportionately target black folks like me. He stepped closer, invading my space, his radio crackling faintly. "Don't get smart with me. I can haul you in for resisting." Before I could respond, his hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. The force yanked me forward, and in a blur, he spun me around, slamming my chest against the rough brick wall of my garage. Pain flared through my ribs, sharp and hot, as the silk of my robe caught and tore slightly at the seam. "Hands behind your back," he barked, his breath hot on my neck. Cold metal clicked around my wrists, the cuffs biting into my skin. I winced but didn't cry out. Around us, curtains twitched in neighboring windows, faces appeared briefly, then vanished. No one called out. No one helped. The familiar sting of isolation washed over me. This was the reality for so many Black women, reduced to suspects in our own lives. As he marched me toward the cruiser, my robe slipping off one shoulder, I thought of the irony, a federal judge, cuffed like a common criminal. But I kept silent, my dignity intact. The storm was brewing, and he had no idea. The cold metal of the cruiser door pressed against my cheek as Higgins shoved me forward, the cuffs digging deeper into my wrists. Pain radiated from my shoulders, but I bit back any sound. I'd felt this violation before, not in cuffs, but in the subtle dismissals, the assumptions that had shadowed my career. As a federal judge, I'd presided over cases where Black women like me were profiled, their dignity stripped in broad daylight. Now, it was my turn, and the irony burned hotter than the ache in my arms. "Officer," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my body. I twisted my head just enough to meet his eyes, then deliberately shifted my gaze to the body camera pinned to his chest. "I am not resisting. I am complying under duress. And this is an unlawful detention." He paused for a fraction of a second, his grip loosening slightly before tightening again. "Save the speech for the station," he snarled, yanking the door open and forcing me inside. My robe caught on the frame, exposing my shoulder to the morning chill. I stumbled onto the vinyl seat, the scent of stale coffee and vinyl assaulting me. Neighbors' curtains fluttered shut, their silence screamed louder than any protest. As he slammed the door, I straightened my posture, ignoring the throb in my ribs. My mind raced, the Fourth Amendment violations, the lack of probable cause, it was textbook misconduct. But I didn't shout or plead. That wasn't my way. I'd built my life on quiet power, turning prejudice into precedent in courtrooms where men like him assumed I didn't belong. Through the grated partition, I caught his smirk in the rearview mirror. He thought he'd won, another suspicious Black woman subdued. But as the engine roared to life, I held his gaze in that mirror, unblinking, serene like a still lake hiding depths. It wasn't anger in my eyes, it was certainty. The storm I'd weathered all my life was about to break, and he was standing in the rain without an umbrella. The cruiser ride felt endless, the hum of the engine a dull backdrop to the ache in my wrists and the cold bite of the cuffs. I sat straight-backed, robe disheveled, staring out at the passing streets of Stone Creek, streets I'd walked for years, streets that now felt foreign. Higgins drove in silence, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror with that smug satisfaction. I didn't speak again. Words were weapons I saved for courtrooms, not for men who already had their verdict. We pulled into the small police station lot, a squat brick building with flickering fluorescent lights. Higgins yanked the door open and hauled me out, his grip bruising. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee and disinfectant. He marched me past the front desk, where a female officer, mid-30s, badge-reading Officer Ramirez, looked up from her computer. Her eyes flicked over me, the torn silk robe, the disheveled hair, the cuffs. A slow smile spread across her face. "Another one," she muttered to the desk sergeant, a burly man with a mustache, not bothering to lower her voice. "Black woman in a fancy robe, standing in the middle of a nice neighborhood? Looks suspicious as hell." The sergeant chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah, probably thinks she's on some TV show. Law and Order, Stone Creek edition." They laughed like it was the punchline to a joke I'd heard 1,000 times. I stood there, wrists bound, robe slipping off one shoulder, feeling the weight of their eyes. No one asked my name. No one ran my plates or checked the address Higgins had radioed in. They just assumed. It was that easy, reduce me to a stereotype, and the rest followed. Higgins shoved me toward the holding area, a small room with a metal bench bolted to the wall. He uncuffed one wrist long enough to chain me to the bench, then stepped back, smirking. "Sit tight, ma'am. We'll get to you when we get to you. I heard them in the hallway, more laughter, the sound of a phone camera clicking. Someone was filming, probably posting to their internal group chat. Check this out, another one acting like she owns the place. I know my rights, she says. Yeah, right. The words stung, but I kept my face impassive. I'd faced worse in court, hostile witnesses, biased judges, systems designed to dismiss people like me. But here, in this fluorescent-lit room, the humiliation felt raw. I closed my eyes briefly, breathing through it. They didn't know who I was. Yet. The laughter faded down the hall, leaving me alone with the echo of their ignorance. I straightened my robe as best I could with one hand chained. The storm was building, and soon, they'd feel the rain. The laughter from the hallway lingered like a bad odor as Higgins returned, unlocking the chain from the bench and dragging me toward a nearby interrogation room. The space was stark, gray walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, and a one-way mirror that I knew had watchful eyes. He shoved me into a chair, recuffing one wrist to the table leg. My robe, now thoroughly rumpled and stained from the scuffle, hung awkwardly, but I adjusted it as best I could, refusing to let discomfort show. Sit there and think about your attitude, he grunted, looming over me with that same smug expression. He turned to leave, but I wasn't done. I'd spent my career in rooms like this, but from the other side, judging cases where rights were trampled. Now, it was my turn to invoke them. Officer Higgins, I said calmly, my voice cutting through the room like a measured ruling from the bench. I request to call my attorney immediately. He froze in the doorway, turning back with a scoff. What? You haven't even been charged yet. His tone dripped with condescension, as if my request was a joke. He crossed his arms, leaning against the frame. You think you're entitled to special treatment? We process people like you all the time. I met his gaze evenly, ignoring the jab. I know my rights under the Sixth Amendment. And I will also require access to the footage from your body camera. The words were precise, not raised, but laced with the authority I'd honed over decades. I could see the flicker in his eyes, a half-second of hesitation, his smirk faltering before he recovered. Body cam? Yeah, right. Like that's gonna help you. He laughed, but it sounded forced now, echoing hollowly in the small room. You should have just cooperated from the start. Now you're making this harder on yourself. He slammed the door shut, the lock clicking with finality. Alone again, I leaned back in the chair, the cuff chafing my skin. My mind raced through the protocols, Miranda rights not yet read, no formal charges, clear Fourth Amendment violation. But I didn't panic. Panic was for those without options. I'd faced juries, hostile witnesses, and systemic barriers that tried to silence black women like me. This was just another case. Higgins thought he held the power, but my silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. The footage would speak, and so would the law. I closed my eyes, breathing steadily. The storm was gathering force. As the door's echo faded, I sat there in the dim interrogation room, the single bulb overhead casting harsh shadows. My wrist throbbed from the cuff, but I focused on my breathing, slow, deliberate. I'd reviewed enough body cam footage in my courtroom to know how this played out, the escalation, the assumptions, the inevitable fallout. Higgins thought he was in control, but men like him always underestimated the quiet ones. I shifted slightly, feeling the weight in my robe's inner pocket. With my free hand, I reached in carefully, my fingers brushing the cool metal of my federal judge's badge. It was a small, unassuming thing, engraved with the seal of the United States Courts, my name etched in fine script. I didn't pull it out fully, no need to reveal my hand yet. Instead, I just touched it, running my thumb over the raised emblem, a silent reminder to myself of who I was. The robe's fabric rustled softly, and for a moment, the room felt smaller, the air thicker with unspoken tension. Through the one-way mirror, I sensed movement, eyes on me. The door cracked open again, and in walked the younger officer I'd glimpsed earlier in the hall. Jake, his badge said, probably fresh out of the academy, with that wide-eyed look of someone not yet hardened by the job. He hovered near the door, clipboard in hand, pretending to check something while stealing glances my way. His eyes landed on my hand, still half in the pocket, the edge of the badge glinting just enough under the light. He squinted, leaning in slightly. "Hey," he muttered, more to himself than anyone, but loud enough for the room. "Is that a federal badge?" Higgins, who had reappeared in the doorway with a styrofoam cup of coffee, froze mid-sip. "What?" he snapped, his voice sharp, dismissing. He strode over, peering at me with renewed suspicion. "What the hell are you talking about, rookie?" Jake pointed vaguely toward my pocket, his face paling as realization dawned. "I think, yeah, that looks like a U.S. court's seal." "Ma'am, are you?" I withdrew my hand slowly, letting the badge slip back into hiding. No words. Just a steady gaze that met Jake's, then shifted to Higgins. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. Higgins laughed it off, forced and brittle. "Probably fake." "Sit down, kid. She's just trying to play games." But I saw the flicker in his eyes, the first crack in his armor. Jake backed away, mumbling something about checking the system. His footsteps hurried down the hall. My imperturbable quiet wasn't submission anymore, it was a warning, a prelude to the reckoning. The storm wasn't just gathering, it was here, swirling in the details they'd overlooked. The minutes dragged on in that sterile interrogation room, the clock on the wall ticking like a metronome to my mounting resolve. Higgins had stormed out after dismissing Jake's comment about my badge, but I knew the seed of doubt had been planted. I sat there, wrist still cuffed to the table, my robe a wrinkled reminder of the indignity. My mind wandered to the courtroom where I'd last presided, a discrimination case involving a young black man pulled over for looking suspicious. How many times had I ruled against such abuses? Now, the irony was suffocating. The door burst open again, and Higgins barreled in, his face flushed red, a sheaf of papers in his fist. He slammed them down on the table with a thud that echoed off the walls, making the chain on my cuff rattle. "All right, enough games," he snarled, his voice low and menacing. "You think you're smart, huh? Sitting there all calm, like you're above this." I met his gaze steadily, my expression unchanging. Inside, a flicker of anger stirred, the kind born from decades of being underestimated, but I tamped it down. Control was my power. "Officer, I've requested my attorney and the body cam footage," I repeated evenly. "That's all I have to say until then." He leaned over the table, knuckles white against the metal, his breath reeking of stale coffee. "I've arrested hundreds of people like you, loitering around fancy neighborhoods, thinking you belong. Don't think that robe hides anything. You're just another one trying to pull a fast one." His words dripped with venom, the people like you hanging heavy, laced with the racism I'd fought my whole career. He paced, gesturing wildly. "You resisted, obstructed, hell, you probably stole that car we were chasing. I'm writing this up right now." He snatched a pen from his pocket and began scribbling on the forms, his handwriting jagged and furious. "Suspicious behavior, failure to comply, resisting arrest," he muttered aloud, as if dictating my fate. "I'll make sure you don't walk out of here anytime soon. You can rot in holding for all I care." My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the raw injustice of it all. This man, with his badge and bias, was fabricating charges on the spot. I thought of the lives ruined by such reports, the wrongful convictions I'd overturned. But I didn't raise my voice. "Those notes are inaccurate," I said quietly, my tone measured like a judicial admonition. "And they'll be scrutinized." He slammed the pen down, the table vibrating. "Scrutinized? By who? You?" He laughed bitterly, but there was an edge to it now, a crack in his bravado. The storm in his eyes raged, but mine remained calm, the eye of it all. He didn't know yet, but his escalation was digging his own grave. His tirade hung in the air like smoke, thick and acrid, but I didn't flinch. Higgins paced the room, his boots thudding against the linoleum, each step amplifying the tension. I watched him, my expression a mask of calm, even as my mind catalogued every violation: false imprisonment, excessive force, the blatant fabrication of charges. In my courtroom, I'd thrown out cases built on less. But here, chained to this table, I was the defendant in a kangaroo court of one. From the hallway, muffled voices filtered through the door, whispers that grew louder, insistent. I strained to listen without showing it. A woman's voice, sharp but hushed, "Did you see the footage from the cam?" She didn't raise her voice once. Didn't do a damn thing. Why the rush to book her like that? It was the receptionist I'd glimpsed earlier, her tone laced with unease. Another voice, male and gruff, probably the desk sergeant, replied, "Higgins has a nose for these types. But yeah, it's weird. No priors popping up yet." Their doubt was a crack in the facade, small but spreading. I allowed myself an inward breath of relief, though my face remained impassive. People like them often turned a blind eye, but sometimes, the absurdity pierced through. I thought of the cases I'd overseen, whistleblowers in police departments, the rare officers who questioned the status quo. Maybe one was out there now. Then, footsteps, quick, hesitant. The door creaked open, and Jake, the young officer from before, poked his head in. His face was pale, eyes wide as they darted from me to Higgins. "Sarge, Officer Higgins," he stammered, clutching his phone like a lifeline. I ran that badge number she had. The one in her pocket. Higgins whirled around, his face contorting. "What? I told you it's probably fake. Don't waste time on." "No, wait," Jake interrupted, his voice gaining urgency. He glanced at me again, swallowing hard. "The system, it matches. Serial number checks out. It's a federal court's badge. Belongs to Judge Serafina Wallace. As in, the new federal judge for the Eastern District." The room went deathly still. Higgins's pen hovered over the paper, frozen mid-scrawl. I could see the color drain from his face, his earlier bravado crumbling like wet sand. "Bullshit," he muttered, but it lacked conviction. He snatched Jake's phone, scrolling frantically, his fingers trembling. Jake backed away, mumbling, "I'm calling it in. This is big, Department of Justice level." He bolted down the hall, his radio crackling to life as he dialed. I sat there, silent, watching the unraveling. The whispers outside grew frantic now. "Federal judge? Holy shit," Higgins screwed up. The storm I'd foreseen was breaking, and I was at its center, unchained in spirit if not in body. They were starting to see, and soon, the flood would come. Higgins's face was inches from mine, twisted in fury as he shoved the falsified report across the table. The paper slid toward me, edges curling under his forceful push. "Sign it," he growled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the room. "Admit to the obstruction, and maybe, I'll cut you some slack. Otherwise, you're looking at a long day in holding." I looked down at the document, the lies scrawled in his jagged handwriting: "Suspect resisted commands, exhibited aggressive behavior." My ribs still ached from the earlier slam against the wall, and the cuff bit into my wrist like a reminder of every injustice I'd fought against. But I didn't waver. In my mind, I replayed the oath I'd taken as a federal judge, to uphold the Constitution, to ensure due process for all. This man had violated that in every way possible. "I will not sign anything based on falsehoods," I said, my voice calm and unwavering, each word deliberate like a gavel strike. I lifted my gaze to meet his, holding it steady. "And, you should prepare to explain yourself to the Department of Justice, Officer Higgins." The room seemed to freeze. His pen hovered, trembling slightly, as the color drained from his ruddy cheeks. "What did you just say?" he whispered, his bravado cracking like thin ice. He leaned back, eyes darting to the door as if expecting reinforcements, or escape. The name, his own name, had pierced through, a personal arrow I'd held in reserve. How did I know it? From his badge, glimpsed during the arrest, etched into my memory like evidence in a trial. You don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and he glanced at the one-way mirror, suddenly aware of invisible eyes. The whispers from the hall had stopped, footsteps approached rapidly. Jake's discovery was spreading, a ripple turning into a wave. I didn't elaborate. No need. My words hung there, simple yet loaded, shifting the power in the room. For years, I'd sat on the bench, watching defendants face down authority with far less at stake. Now, in this reversal, I embodied the law he'd abused. His hand shook as he gathered the papers, stuffing them into his pocket as if hiding the evidence. "This is bullshit," he muttered, but he backed toward the door, his earlier dominance evaporated. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. I sat there, robe still askew, but my spirit unbroken. The storm had peaked, now came the deluge. Higgins didn't know it yet, but my single sentence had unsealed his fate, turning the tide in a way no shout ever could. The door burst open moments later, but in that breath, I felt the quiet victory of truth over tyranny. The silence that followed my words was thick, almost tangible. Higgins stood frozen, the falsified report clutched in his fist like a lifeline slipping away. His eyes darted to the door, then back to me, as if willing the moment to rewind. I sat there, wrist still cuffed to the table, my robe a crumpled testament to the morning's indignity. But inside, a quiet certainty settled over me, like the calm before a verdict is read in court. I'd waited for this. Then, the intercom on the wall crackled to life, a sharp buzz that cut through the tension like a knife. Everyone in the room, Higgins, the sergeant who'd wandered in moments earlier, even Jake hovering near the door, jumped slightly. The speaker emitted a crisp, authoritative female voice, amplified and unmistakable. "This is Chief Inspector Elena Ramirez, Department of Justice, Region 7. Who is currently detaining Judge Serafina Wallace?" The room went dead silent. Higgins's pen slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor, rolling under the table with a soft, final sound. His face drained of color, turning ashen, eyes wide with the dawning horror of realization. The sergeant stared at the intercom as if it had grown teeth, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Jake, still clutching his phone, looked like he'd been struck. I remained still, my expression unchanged, though my heart beat a steady, measured rhythm. I'd known this moment was coming. The badge in my pocket wasn't just metal, it was a key to a network of accountability that reached far beyond this small-town station. The DOJ didn't call for nothing. The sergeant fumbled for the intercom button, his hand trembling. This is Sergeant Harlan, Stone Creek PD, he stammered, voice cracking. We have a suspect in custody, ma'am. Name's Wallace. Serafina Wallace." A pause on the line, heavy with implication. Then the inspector's voice returned, colder now, edged with steel. "Suspect? Sergeant, you are detaining a sitting federal judge. Lieutenant General Olivia Vance has been informed. A team is en route. Do not move her. Do not question her further. And Officer Higgins, your body cam footage is already being pulled. Stand down immediately." Higgins staggered back a step, his back hitting the wall. He looked at me, really looked, for the first time, not as a suspicious black woman but as the authority he'd trampled. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. The sergeant turned to him, face pale. "Clint, what the hell did you do?" I said nothing. I didn't need to. The wheels of justice, which I'd helped turn for decades, were now rolling over the man who'd tried to crush me. The storm had broken, and the rain was falling hard. The intercom clicked off, leaving a vacuum of silence that sucked the air from the room. Higgins stood there, statue still, his face a mask of dawning horror. The sergeant, Harlan, I'd noted from his badge, stared at me as if seeing a ghost materialize. Jake, the young officer who'd pieced it together, shifted uncomfortably by the door, his phone still in hand, screen glowing with the confirmation he'd pulled from the system. Judge Wallace? Harlan finally croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, peering at me like I was an exhibit in a case file. As in, the federal judge? Eastern District? I nodded once, my expression serene, though inside, a quiet vindication bloomed. That's correct, Sergeant. Serafina Wallace, appointed to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District. The words hung there, simple facts that carried the weight of authority I'd earned through years of battling uphill in a system that often saw black women as obstacles rather than arbiters. Jake cleared his throat, his voice steadier now. Yeah, Sarge. I ran the badge serial. It's legit. She's the one who just took the bench, handled that big civil rights case last month. He glanced at me with a mix of awe and apology, his earlier hesitation replaced by reluctant respect. The room's energy shifted palpably, the air that had been thick with disdain now crackled with fear. Higgins stumbled back a step, his hands fumbling at his belt as if to steady himself. This can't be, he muttered, eyes darting between us. But it was. The female officer from the front desk, Ramirez, poked her head in, her earlier smirk wiped clean, replaced by wide-eyed shock. She looked at me, really looked, and I saw the flicker, recognition, then shame. Oh God, she whispered to Harlan. We live-streamed the intake. In the group chat. The sergeant's face paled further. Delete it. Now. But it was too late. Whispers spread like wildfire down the hall. Federal judge? Higgins arrested a judge? Officers gathered at the door, peering in with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright dread. One, an older black sergeant I'd glimpsed earlier, met my eyes and nodded subtly, a silent acknowledgement of solidarity amid the chaos. I sat there, still cuffed, robe askew, but my posture unbroken. Their gazes had transformed, no longer dismissive, but deferential, laced with the terror of consequences. I'd seen this shift before, from the bench, when truth upended lies. Now, it was my reality. The storm had fully broken, washing away their illusions, and in its wake, accountability loomed. Higgins's world crumbled in slow motion, his broad shoulders slumping as the reality sank in. He backed away from the table, his hands raised in a futile gesture of surrender, eyes wide and pleading. I didn't know, he stammered, his voice cracking like brittle glass. You didn't say anything. How was I supposed to? I looked up at him, my gaze steady and unflinching, the cuff still binding my wrist, a stark reminder of his actions. Inside, a storm of emotion swirled, anger at the violation, sorrow for the systemic rot that bred men like him, but above all, a resolute calm forged from years on the bench. I didn't need to say anything, I replied evenly, my tone measured, each word a deliberate incision. You had every opportunity to act with decency. To verify, to listen, to treat me as a person rather than a presumption. But you chose otherwise, stripped away by your own biases. The words landed like verdicts I'd delivered countless times, final, unappealable. Higgins's face twisted, a mix of denial and dawning regret. He glanced around the room, at Harlan, at Jake, at the gathering officers in the doorway, as if seeking an ally, but found only averted eyes and uncomfortable shifts. This is a mistake, he muttered, more to himself than anyone. I was just doing my job. You were suspicious, standing there in that robe. His excuses trailed off as footsteps echoed down the hall, purposeful and heavy. The door swung open wider, admitting 2 agents from the DOJ's Internal Affairs team, crisp suits, badges gleaming, expressions grim. The lead agent, a tall woman with sharp features, scanned the room before zeroing in on Higgins. "Officer Clint Higgins?" she asked, her voice clipped and authoritative. He nodded weakly, sweat now visibly beading on his forehead. "You're suspended effective immediately," she stated flatly, pulling out a tablet and tapping through documents. "We're initiating a full investigation into civil rights violations, unlawful detention, excessive force, falsification of reports. Hand over your badge and weapon." Higgins fumbled with his belt, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped his gun. The room watched in stunned silence as he complied, the clink of metal on the table echoing like a death knell. Harlan uncuffed me at last, mumbling apologies under his breath, but I barely registered it. My focus was on Higgins, now a shell of the man who'd slammed me against my own garage wall. He slumped into a chair, head in hands, the weight of his choices crushing him. As the agents led him away for questioning, I rubbed my wrist, the red marks a temporary scar. Justice wasn't vengeance, it was correction. And in that moment, as the station buzzed with the fallout, I felt the quiet power of truth prevailing once more. The storm had passed, leaving clarity in its wake. The morning after felt like a rebirth, the crisp air of Stone Creek carrying a hint of redemption as I stepped out of the police station's front doors. The building loomed behind me, a squat symbol of the indignity I'd endured, but I walked with my head high, my black judicial robe, donned for the occasion, flowing like a cape of quiet authority. No entourage flanked me, no flashing cameras from the press hounded my steps. I'd insisted on discretion. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about restoration. At 52, I'd learned that true power didn't roar, it whispered, persistent and unyielding. The aches from yesterday, the bruised ribs, the chafed wrists, lingered as dull reminders, but they fueled my resolve rather than diminished it. As a black woman who'd clawed her way to the federal bench, I'd faced worse: skeptical juries, dismissive colleagues, systems that viewed my presence as an intrusion. This incident? It was just another chapter in a long story of resilience. The parking lot was sparsely populated, a few officers milling about their cruisers, pretending not to notice. But they did. Heads turned, conversations hushed. The female officer from the front desk, Ramirez, stood by her car, her earlier smirk replaced by a averted gaze, cheeks flushed with what I hoped was shame. Sergeant Harlan lingered near the entrance, hat in hand, mumbling something about paperwork complete. I nodded curtly, not pausing. Then, a young officer, perhaps in his early 20s, uniform crisp and eyes wide, stepped forward from the shadows of a patrol car. He straightened, snapping to attention, and offered a solemn salute. "Ma'am, Judge Wallace," he said, voice steady but reverent. I just wanted to say, what happened yesterday, it wasn't right. We're better than that." I paused, meeting his eyes. No bitterness clouded my vision, only the wisdom of someone who'd seen justice delayed too often. "Thank you, officer," I replied softly, with a slight nod. "Remember that sentiment in your duties. Justice isn't selective, it's for everyone." He lowered his hand, a flicker of determination crossing his face. As I continued to my car, parked discreetly at the edge of the lot, I felt their stares, not suspicious now, but respectful, tinged with the discomfort of reflection. The storm had passed, leaving a clearer sky. I'd walked into that station diminished in their eyes. I walked out as a reminder that power unchecked invites its own downfall. And in that quiet exit, I carried the weight of all the black women who'd been unseen, unheard, vowing, as always, to keep the scales balanced. The days following my release blurred into a whirlwind of quiet reflection and unexpected ripple effects. I'd returned home that afternoon, shedding the rumpled robe for a simple blouse and slacks, then spent the evening reviewing case files as if nothing had transpired. But the world outside my study hummed with the incident's aftermath. By evening, snippets of body cam footage and station surveillance had leaked online, anonymous uploads that spread like digital wildfire across platforms. I first noticed it on my phone, alerts pinging from news aggregators. The video showed my arrest in stark clarity, Higgins's aggressive shove, my calm compliance, the dismissive laughter in the holding area. Comments flooded in, a mix of outrage and support. "This is why we need reform," one read. "How many go through this without a badge?" another asked. But one stood out, pinned high in a viral thread, a post from the front desk officer, Ramirez, who'd eyed me with suspicion. She wrote, "I was the one who processed her intake, the one who whispered doubts about her fancy robe. I held her ID first, verified it, and realized my mistake. At the time, I saw a suspicious stranger. Now, I keep that video on my device, not as a trophy, but a lesson. You don't need to know someone's title to treat them right. Respect isn't earned by status, it's owed to everyone. I've enrolled in bias training because of this." Change starts small, but it starts. Her words hit me deeply, not with triumph, but a profound sense of shared humanity. As a judge, I'd mandated such programs and rulings, but seeing one person's awakening felt personal. It echoed the broader impact. The video sparked petitions for departmental audits, calls for mandatory cams in all interactions. I scrolled through, my thoughts drifting to the countless Black women without my privileges, who faced this daily, their stories buried. Ramirez's admission wasn't just confession, it was a spark, illuminating the shadows of prejudice. In that moment, alone in my living room, I felt the weight of progress, not complete, but incremental. The incident wasn't mine alone anymore, it belonged to the collective push for equity. A week later, I found myself back in the familiar marble halls of the federal courthouse, the Eastern District's grand edifice where I'd spent countless hours dispensing justice. The air carried the faint scent of polished wood and aged documents, a comforting constancy amid recent turmoil. As I walked the corridor toward my chambers, briefcase in hand, my steps echoed softly, deliberate, unhurried. Colleagues nodded in passing, their greetings warmer now, laced with unspoken solidarity after the news of my ordeal had circulated through legal circles. Then, I noticed it, a new framed photograph mounted on the wall near the entrance to the main courtroom. It captured me mid-stride across the courthouse lawn, hair neatly pinned, eyes forward, clutching a stack of case files. The image was candid, taken perhaps by a staff photographer during a routine day. Below it, etched on a brass plaque, read the inscription, "She demands no recognition. She simply walks as if denial has never touched her." I paused, tracing the words with my gaze. The photo wasn't staged, it embodied the quiet defiance I'd cultivated over decades, as a Black woman navigating law school rejections, courtroom skepticism, and now, this blatant profiling. It wasn't about me alone, it symbolized every overlooked individual who'd pressed on despite erasure. In that moment, memories flooded back, the cold cuffs, the mocking laughter, the video's viral spread forcing accountability. Higgins faced charges now, demotion, potential dismissal, while the department implemented mandatory reviews of arrest protocols. Yet, the plaque stirred something deeper, a reminder that progress wasn't linear. I'd continue presiding over cases, advocating for reforms like expanded body cams and bias audits. Justice wasn't a destination but a relentless pursuit, especially for those without my platform. As I resumed my walk, the corridor's light caught the frame, casting a soft glow. I didn't seek acclaim, I sought equity. And in that steadfast stride, I carried forward, not unbroken, but unbowed, ensuring the path cleared for those who followed. The fight endured, and so did I.